All right, before we get into the case studies, I want to go over a few things to prepare you on how I'm looking at cases, how I'm going to discuss cases, and some tips on how you can get the most benefit out of the case studies that we're going to go over. Now, first thing I want to mention is everything's going to be very short and sweet, because I want to go over a lot of high-level tips so we can cover cases, in a shorter period of time, but still give you some good ideas of how other people do it and how you can do it successfully. Now, one thing about the high-level and low-level tips, obviously when I say something like obtain geolocation data from a computer, that's a very high-level tip, or high-level suggestion compared to a low-level. So if I were to delve into each high-level tip, in these case studies, and some I will, but majority I won't, it's because of the time necessary and the technical skills most likely you already have or can easily find it elsewhere. So for example, finding geolocation data from a computer, whether it be a laptop or even a desktop. For low level, you can drill all the way down to having to identify the device, right, and hit to seize it with legal authority or consent. And whether you image it or not, it's another scenario, or whether you verify the image or not, or whether you have to, or whether you even examine it as a live machine and not imaging it. And then you have looking at, let's say we're going to choose a registry as one location for geolocation data. And to examine that registry, we're either going to use a forensic suite that the image is pulled into, whether it be FTK or X-Ways EnCase, or we're going to extract the registry and go through it with RegRipper or some other registry tool, and then drill down to the actual key, here at profiles key, and identify the wireless connection and investigate the wireless connection, the source, the date and time, and everything else about it. And then we're going to go to another artifact of geolocation. It may be the browser. We're going to look at browser, information we can pull. So going over low-level information on how to obtain geolocation from a computer would probably take up the entire time that I'd rather spend going over a case. So some things I'm going to go over low-level just because it may be very minimal knowledge about it or not really publicized that much. I may hit those a little bit on low level, but mostly it's going to be a lot of high level, and that's going to be kind of up to you to Google, how do I obtain geolocation data from a computer, or perhaps you already know, oh, that's right, I can get it from that registry key. Now the source of the information I'm going to use for case studies is going to be search warrants, affidavits for search warrants, and some reports if they're publicly available, and very few news articles, if any, only because I don't see news articles getting it right all the time, and they're not reporting on what I believe is important as a case study. Reading a news article about a dark web operator got arrested because FBI found the IP address really doesn't help you unless you know how he was identified, how did they get the IP address, what steps did they take, those sort of things are what I want to talk about with case studies, not talk about articles that, oh yeah, someone got arrested because their IP address was leaked, right? So that's what we're going to go through in these kind of cases. All right, so on search warrants, you may already know about search warrants and affidavits because you write them or you've written them, right? But if you don't, just briefly, a search warrant is something that's signed and approved by a judge or magistrate, and it only details the place and persons and items to be searched, right? With only a few pages. It's not what we're going to go over with a case study. And I've seen some search warrants that did have some probable cause actually in the search warrant, which is I find to be unusual. So for the most part, we're going to go over the affidavits or the complaints for search warrants. Now this is the bare guts of the investigation, spells out the probable cause, and really nothing that's unnecessary for the search warrant. This is basically the facts of, here judge is my reasoning to arrest somebody, or my reasoning to get the logs from this Gmail account, is my reasoning to do something. The format is usually similar across the board with boilerplates and facts and the request for the search. And the other common things are the affiant swears to the facts. And the affiant can be the investigator or attorney or whoever. And the length is 10 pages or more. It could be very long depending on the case. A very serious case can be short, just because not that much happened in the span of 30 seconds or a minute. A long case, and a very intensive case can be extremely long with an affidavit, just because the amount of crimes and time that has happened. So depending on the actual case and the work done is going to determine the length of the affidavit. And I'm going to spend probably just as much time going over a 10-page affidavit as I am a 50-page affidavit, only because, I don't want to spend hours going over a specific case when I just want to hit the high points to give you some good tips. Now, reports of a case, these are all the details of the case. So if you're the investigator, you're writing up everything in a report, and everyone else is writing supplemental reports to you. These are generally not released publicly, and I wouldn't expect it ever to be released publicly, just because of the amount of information in these reports would just be overburdened for law enforcement agencies. Now, you can request it if you want as public records, I could too, but I'm not, only because the time to request public records of these reports and then to do a case study on hundreds of pages of reports is actually it goes against what I'm trying to do here. And that's to find great cases with some great work done, tell you how they did it with the high level, some low level, and you can run with it, right after you went over the case study. Now, the reports are the basis of the search warrant affidavits. So let's look at the affidavit as a summary of the case, and that's why we're going to use the affidavits for these case studies. So the way I look at case studies is it's all about attribution, right? And I think everything you should do should be in the mode of thinking about attribution. Who did this, and how can I prove that they did this? I tie this to every evidence item as well. Any evidence item I look at, I think, how does it relate to the case or the person? Or, how does it relate to a case, and maybe provide a clue or a lead to more evidence or something else that's pertinent to the case? I think of it from the origin of the item all the way to the seizure. If it's an iPhone, I think about what store was it purchased from and by whom, and where did it go from there. So I put that in my mind, just like a movie. And I think about the number of devices that's potential that I know I'm not ever going to have, just because it's typically going to be impossible to know how many devices have been used in a case. Even when we're looking at two criminals or two co-conspirators in industrial espionage, or even an internal employee matter, or you have two or more people communicating with each other, the methods that they can communicate is just beyond what you're going to be able to know for certain. For example, you can have two people communicating through social media, but one uses a free Wi-Fi, one uses a local area network. Maybe one's using a cell phone, maybe one's using a desktop, maybe they both use email, maybe they're using an encryption and going through the cloud or hidden services or Tor. But typically they're going to be using a lot of different methods. So in every case, you have to think about how many different devices am I finding or not finding, and how many different methods of communication am I finding or not finding, and what more could there be? Now, each device and each method is basically another user account. If you use an email, you're looking at each person has at least one email account, so maybe you have dozens of email accounts with one person using. So just the amount of devices and methods, keep in mind, and that's some of the tips we're going to go over in case studies. Now, also with these case studies, I'm going to go over some neat tricks, because every case study should have at least one neat trick for you to learn. So, for example, here's an easy one. It's been done several times in the past. It's identifying a bank robber's cell phone, and you can tie this to a serial murderer. You can tie this to theft. You can stolen cars. Anything you can tie this to, really. So let's say you have I just picked 3 different locations, 3 different dates and times of bank robberies, and we have nothing to tie these bank robberies together, but we do a cell tower dump of those locations of those bank robberies at that date and time of those bank robberies. So you can see we have one on May 4th, May 7th, and May 12th in 3 different cities. Now, find the common cell. That's what you need to do with this cell tower dump. And again, find the common cell is a high-level tip, because obviously you're not going to have the cell phone numbers in these cell tower dumps. And getting a cell tower dump is not as easy as going online and saying, please send me the cell tower dump. There's things behind that. There's the request, depending on your jurisdiction, on your legal authority and such, and then finding the common cell, getting the cell number from the ESN numbers and such. But that's just an example of the high-level tip of find the common cell. So if you have these 3 bank robberies, 3 different dates and times, 3 different cities, but each one of them had a single common smartphone cell number, what are the odds that this is not the bank robber? That's a really easy tip to find out this is probably your suspect. Now, what if you find more than one? Let's say you find 2 common phones in each one of these bank robbery scenarios. Well, the odds that someone's going to be, in in a bank robbery as a witness or a victim in 3 different banks at 3 different times is very low. To be at the same bank as the same bank robber that you maybe have on video is going to be next to impossible. So perhaps you only have a bank robber on video, but for some reason you have a common cell in all these bank robberies. Well, that's either your getaway driver, or maybe that's an inside job. Maybe it's the conspirator who is pretending to be a customer. So it does give you some more avenues to identify, suspects. Now, obviously, once you find the phone, there's a lot of tips we can go over on what you can do with the phone number. So the tips we're going to talk about are also investigative tips as well. So there's some easy things, like the cell tower dump. Very simple, but maybe you didn't think of it before. And there's some complex tips that we're going to go over. So with the investigative tips, we get the mindset that we're kind of talking about the whole time. Doesn't matter civil or criminal cases, or you're doing an internal investigation on someone, you have to have that mindset because you're investigating computer activity and people, and you're looking to answer who did it, right? And prove who did it, whether it be to terminate someone, charge somebody with a crime, whatever it is that you're trying to prove or disprove, you have to have that mindset of what you're doing. Now, with that mindset, I am a firm believer it does not take a cyber criminal to catch a cyber criminal. There's that, that slang of it takes a thief to catch a thief. That makes for a catchy movie topic, but it doesn't make for actual life. And I say cyber criminal, it doesn't take any criminal to catch a criminal. You don't have to be a murderer to catch a murderer. It takes an investigator to catch these. Again, with the mindset, we're going to question, corroborate yourself all the time. And I always think coincidences don't happen, but when coincidences happen, I take advantage of it. Meaning, suspects don't like to make mistakes, but when they do, take advantage of their mistakes, right? So everything you see, you question it, and if something doesn't seem right, you're going to question it even more. I always treat my cases like a movie or a novel, and I, play it out in my head, and I try to figure it out. And I look at it that way because every case is like a movie or a novel because there's plot or plots and there's characters. You have your action where we're going to steal something, we're going to break something or hurt somebody, and then you have the characters of who's going to do that and who are they going to do that to. If something doesn't make sense, there's a reason for it because most movies and novels flow. They make some sort of sense as a flow, and real life is like that as well. If something's not there, it doesn't make sense, there's a reason for it, and that makes me more curious. I want to dig for what's really going on. And I do that by asking questions. And I get an answer and I corroborate that answer. So if I ask myself a question, I get the answer, and then I go back and I say, well, let me make sure that's correct because I'm going to stake my reputation on it by signing a statement of perjury. Now, in these case studies we're going to go over, I'm only going to go over that which is public, which is primarily affidavits. Again, I'm only going to go so deep without getting too deep into a case, just because we can go over more and be more beneficial to you than rather going really too deep into the weeds of a case. And I'm going to put out the things that are really neat to know or important, or especially the instrumental things to know on how to work a case.